Close your eyes, dear listener, and let the rustle of ancient wheat and the hum of distant fields lull you into the soft folds of sleep. Tonight we drift back, far, far back, to a time before cities, before books, before kings, a time when humanity first set aside the hunt and planted the seed. This is the entire story of the agricultural revolution, told gently in whispers of grain, of fire-cleared land, and of humble beginnings. From the first gathered seeds beside a riverbank to the rise of farming villages that would one day birth civilizations, this journey is slow, earthy, and quietly extraordinary. Let the plow replace the spear. Let the soil become your pillow. Before we wander down the furrows of ancient fields, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to join us for more sleepy history every week. Also, tell us in the comments, what's one forgotten era of history you'd love to fall asleep to? We love your suggestions and sleepy curiosity. You are standing on the edge of the Euphrates Valley 12,000 years ago when the air is cooler and the river is fat with meltwater from the Taurus Mountains. There is no town, no wall, no road, only a low sandstone bluff that will one day be called Tel Abu Huraira. Right now it is simply a convenient overhang where a handful of people have slept for longer than anyone can remember. They do not call themselves farmers. They do not call themselves anything. They simply wake each dawn, pick up their bone-handled sickles, and walk out onto the open steppe where the rye grass grows shin-high and the seeds cling to your palms like tiny golden burrs. These people know the rye intimately. They know which patches ripen first, which ones resist the wind, which ones taste faintly sweet if you crush the grains between your molars and let the juice sit on your tongue. They move with the rye, camping beside the thickest stands until the seeds are perfect, then bundling the stalks into sheaves that lean together like tired soldiers. The work is tedious, hour after hour of bending, gripping, stripping, stacking. Your lower back aches in sympathy just watching them. Yet the ache is familiar, almost comforting, because it means the earth has once again offered enough to keep everyone alive until the next season. One woman, you, would call her Garda if you needed a name, has spent the last 40 mornings doing nothing but pulling wild mustard from among the rye. The mustard seeds pop when they are ripe, flinging themselves away from the parent plant and landing 3 paces distant, which makes them a nuisance if you want predictability. Garda's fingers are stained green at the tips, and the skin between her thumb and forefinger has cracked open in a clean, painless line that never quite heals because each dawn she reopens it. She does not think of herself as selecting for rye. She thinks only that mustard makes the grain harder to thresh and the bread bitter. Bitterness, in her experience, is something to be removed early before it spreads. At midday, the wind picks up, rattling the seed heads so that they whisper against each other like dry scrolls. The people pause, straight, and listen. Wind can mean rain, or it can mean dust that scours the eyes and grits the teeth. Today it carries neither. It is simply wind, indifferent and endless. They bend again. A pile of sheaves grows. Someone begins humming, a 3-note pattern that rises and falls with the rhythm of cutting, so softly that the sound is swallowed by the grass. By late afternoon, the rye has been gathered from an area the size of 3 football fields laid side by side. The stalks left behind stand ankle-high, already browning, already forgetting they were ever taller. Karda's youngest child, a boy who still sleeps with his thumb in his mouth, collects the fallen grains one by one and drops them into a pouch made of gazelle skin. He is slow, distractible, and absolutely serious. Every seed matters because hunger is not an abstract future, but a remembered past. When the pouch is full, he ties it with a strip of linen and carries it to his mother, who empties it into the communal basket without comment. The boy's reward is a handful of raw grain that he eats like candy, chewing until the starches turn sweet on his tongue. Evening comes suddenly. The sun drops behind the bluff and the air cools so quickly that sweat turns cold under your linen. The people build a small fire of tamarisk twigs and sit close, knees touching, passing a single clay bowl of water from hand to hand. They speak little. What is there to say? The rye is cut, the grains are safe, the stars are pricking through. Someone mentions that the moon looks thinner than last night. Someone else grunts agreement. The conversation stalls, and in the silence you can hear the seeds in the baskets shifting, settling, whispering to themselves. Tonight they will sleep under the overhang again, 23 bodies arranged like spoons, feet toward the fire. Rats rustle in the shadows, but the baskets are lifted on forked sticks and the rats cannot reach them. Garda lies awake long after the others have drifted off, thinking about the mustard she pulled today and the mustard she will pull tomorrow. She wonders, not in words but in a slow, visceral way, what would happen if the mustard simply stopped appearing? Would the rye grow thicker? Would the grains grow fatter? She has no concept of evolution or genetics, only a quiet sense that the world changes in tiny increments that can be nudged if you are patient enough to nudge them every single day for more days than you can count somewhere. In the darkness a fox barks once and is answered by silence. The fire settles into embers. Overhead the Pleiades wheel slowly westward, marking time the way they have since before there were eyes to see them. Garda's breathing evens out. The rye, already reseeding itself in the trampled ground, waits for tomorrow's sun, and you, listening across 12 millennia, realize that nothing dramatic has happened. No lightning, no revelation, no voice from the sky, yet everything has begun to change. The seeds in the baskets are not quite the same as the seeds that grew here last year. The hands that chose them are not quite the same either. A threshold has been crossed so gently that no one felt the bump. Tomorrow the rye will still be wild, but it will be wild in a direction that human preference has already begun to steer. The long, boring miracle of domestication is underway, and the only evidence is the ache in Garda's back and the faint green stain on her fingertips that will never entirely wash away. But the night is not finished. Before sleep claims her, Garda remembers the strange pale seedling she noticed at the edge of the stand, a plant that looked like rye yet carried its seeds in a tighter cluster, almost like fingers closed in a fist. She had not pulled it. She had not cut it. She had simply stared, unsettled, as if the plant were staring back. Tomorrow she will decide whether to spare it again or to treat it like any other weed. The choice seems small, almost absurdly small, yet the future of wheat, barley, oats, every grassy crop that will ever feed a city, hangs on such unnoticed moments. The ryegrass stands still under the starlight, waiting for her answer, and you are left wondering what she will decide when the dew settles and the cutting begins again. You wake with the Abu Huraira people on the first morning of what they do not yet call spring. The sky is the color of wet ash, and the Euphrates, swollen with Anatolian snowmelt, has crawled halfway across the valley floor. The ryegrass is still green, still breast high, but something has changed overnight. The strange, pale seedling Garda spared yesterday is no longer alone. Around it, in a rough circle the width of 3 outstretched arms, stand 24 others with the same tight-fingered seed heads. They look like a family that has gathered to bargain with the wind. Garda kneels, touches the nearest head, and feels the grains, fat and slick, beneath their papery husks. They detach easily, almost eagerly, as if the plant has decided to cooperate. She has no word for volunteer, yet that is what these seedlings are. Last year's shattered ears have rooted where they fell, and the ones she chose not to pull have somehow outcompeted their wild cousins. The discovery is too quiet for excitement. It is simply noted the way you note that the fire is hot, or that a child has grown another finger width. The band spends the day cutting the new stand, working inward from the periphery so that the pale cohort is harvested last. When the final stalk falls, Garda ties it separately, carries it back to camp, and lays it on a flat stone at the rear of the overhang. She does not know why she isolates it. Perhaps she wants to watch it dry, to see if the seeds shatter or cling. Her brother, whose name would sound like Elam in your mouth, thinks she is wasting effort. "Grass is grass," he mutters, but he leaves her to it because the day is long, and everyone's arms tremble from repetition. Night brings the usual assembly of tired bodies. Someone has found a hedgehog and roasted it. The meat is stringy, the flavor faintly nutty. While they chew, an older woman named Tasmin begins to speak. Not a story, more a remembering, of the year the river shifted suddenly westward, and the rye did not ripen at all. They lived that winter on dried fish and the sour berries of Christ's thorn. Children died, she says, not dramatically but quietly, as candles gutter. Her voice is level, almost bored, yet the camp falls silent except for the soft grind of teeth on tiny bones. When she finishes, no one replies. The past is not argued with. Carter looks at her private sheaf and wonders whether tight clinging seeds would have saved those children, and whether saving children is even a thing plants can be asked to do. Over the following weeks, the isolated heads dry to the color of old parchment. Carter rubs them between her palms. The grains detach in a single cluster, refusing to scatter. She tastes one, starchy, dull, forgettable. Still, she saves every kernel, storing them in a fresh gazelle skin pouch that she hangs from a peg hammered into the sandstone. The peg is high enough that children cannot reach it, low enough that she can feel the bundle whenever she passes. Sometimes, when the camp is asleep, she squeezes the pouch and listens to the faint rattle, the sound of potential energy. Meanwhile, the river continues its slow invasion. Each dawn, the waterline is a forearm farther inland, licking at the base of the bluff. One morning, the people wake to find the flood has undercut the path they used to reach the valley floor. They must now descend by sliding on their bellies, clutching grass tufts. The rye stands that lie beyond reach will have to be forgotten. No one laments. They simply redraw the mental map of what is possible. Yet the loss nags at Garda, because the pale cohort was growing down there, and she had intended to watch it reseed itself. Elam suggests moving camp upstream to higher ground. The idea is debated in the passive, elliptical manner of people who have learned that most decisions make themselves if you wait long enough. While they wait, Garda takes her pouch and walks alone to the river's new edge. She scatters a handful of the tight-grained seeds onto a narrow shelf of fresh silt, pressing them in with her heel. She has no plan, no theory. She simply wants to see whether they will tolerate wet feet. Then she returns to the overhang and says nothing. The water keeps rising. By the time the moon has waned twice, the shelf she seeded is under 2 handspans of muddy current. She assumes the experiment is lost. Yet the image of those grains, buried, saturated, perhaps already sprouting, lingers like a half-remembered tune. She dreams of roots threading downward into darkness, of green shoots piercing moonlit water, of a harvest that belongs to no one and therefore to everyone. One dawn, the camp wakes to shouts from the lower slope. A boy who went to urinate has found green blades standing ankle-high, exactly where Garda scattered her seeds. The river has retreated overnight, revealing a miniature meadow of pale, upright grass. The plants are stunted but alive, their seed heads already forming. The band gathers, staring as if at a miracle, though no one uses that word. Elam kneels, touches a head, and laughs, a short, surprised bark that startles even himself. Hada feels something shift inside her chest. a sliding similar to the moment when you realize a child no longer needs to be carried. She still lacks vocabulary for selection, domestication, or even farm. Yet she understands that the seeds and she have entered a negotiation. She gives them soft ground and respite from mustard. They give her loyalty. The bargain is unspoken, perhaps imaginary, but from this day forward, she will repeat it every season, widening the circle of spared plants, shortening the distance between harvest and sowing until the boundary between wild and tame is too blurred to notice. That evening, she returns the remaining pouch seeds to the communal basket, mixing them with the ordinary haul. Her gesture looks like surrender, but it is the opposite. She is releasing her private experiment into the common bloodstream, letting the tight-headed trait infiltrate every future loaf. The grains mingle with a soft, rasping sound, like many tiny doors closing. She sleeps deeply, dreamlessly, and wakes to find that the river has crept forward again, erasing yesterday's meadow. It does not matter. The seeds are now in the basket, and the basket will travel with the people wherever the water forces them to go. But the story is not finished. Before the band strikes camp, Tasmin asks Garda why she bothered. "The rye comes back anyway," the old woman says. "It always has." Garda opens her mouth, closes it, finally answers with a question of her own. What if one year it doesn't? Tasmin shrugs, the matter apparently settled. Yet that night, she too fills a small pouch, this time with the fattest grains from the center of each ear. She does not tell anyone, not even Garda, but when the group moves, she carries the pouch tucked inside her dress, close to the skin where the heartbeat can keep it warm, and so, without proclamation, without theology, the people of Abu Huraira slip across the invisible frontier that separates gathering from cultivation. They will not notice the crossing for several lifetimes, and by the time they do, the rye will already have changed its nature, its seed heads forever closed like fists that refuse to scatter without human permission. You, listening in the dark, realize that the most profound revolutions begin not with thunder, but with the soft click of seeds sliding against one another inside a basket, a sound so ordinary that even the mice do not pause in their nibbling. Still, the question lingers. When the river shifts again, and it will these new, obedient grains follow the people uphill, or will they linger like abandoned children, waiting for floods that never recede? The answer lies seasons ahead, in soils not yet deposited, in choices not yet imagined. For now, the camp packs, the baskets lift, and the tight-headed rye begins its slow migration toward every future field that will ever feed a city. You follow the band uphill to a limestone ridge, 2 hours' walk south. The river cannot reach here, but a shallow depression catches winter rains and turns green long before the surrounding steppe. The people arrive tired, footsore, quieter than usual, because every step carries them farther from the familiar bluff where their grandparents breathed. Carda's pouch is now everyone's pouch. The tight-grained seeds have been distributed by handfuls, a casual generosity that feels less like sharing and more like insurance. They camp beneath an overhang again, smaller this time, smelling of bat droppings and wild honey. The first order of business is fire, the second water, the third food. The rye basket is opened and the grains inspected for mold. A few grey tufts appear. They are picked out and fed to the flames which flare green-blue as fungal spores ignite. What remains is spread on flat rocks to finish drying. Children are warned away with low growls. Even toddlers sense that these seeds are no longer mere food, but something closer to tomorrow itself. When the moon is a thin hook, they break ground. The work is novel enough to feel awkward. No one has ever thrust a digging stick into soil chosen by humans rather than by rye. The sticks are deer, shoulder blades lashed to elm handles. They jab, lever, lift, creating a line of fist-sized holes that remind you of a giant's footprints. Into each hole goes one, perhaps two, seeds, an almost ceremonial parsimony. The earth is pressed back with thumbs calloused from seasons of cutting. The row is 10 paces long, then 20, then 50. It curves like a lazy snake because no one thought to stretch a guideline. No one cares. The line is alive, and that is miracle enough. Days settle into a rhythm that will one day be called farming and will sound exhausting, but for now is simply a different kind of breathing. Dawn. Check the field for overnight depredations by mice or partridge. Mid-morning, carry water in clay-lined baskets from the depression, sprinkling each plant the way you might soothe a fevered child. Noon. Retreat to shade, chew, dried fish, nap. Afternoon. Weed, not because anyone knows the word weed, but because certain plants prickle and others taste wrong. Evening. Sit beside the shoots and listen to them rustle. A sound thinner than wild rye, but recognizably the same family. The first heads form in what you would call late May. They are pale, compact, unmistakably the descendants of Carda's solitary strange plant. She walks the road daily now, touching each head the way a midwife checks a pulse. One afternoon she finds a single ear that has reverted, long, lax awns, seeds ready to shatter at a breath. She plucks it instinctively, then hesitates. If she removes every wildling, will the new form grow weaker? She has no language for genetic diversity, only an intuitive sense that sameness invites danger. She lets the ear fall, but marks the spot with a fist-sized stone. Tomorrow she will decide. Tomorrow arrives with thunder. Storms here are brief, but violent. The wind flattens grasses, snaps tamarisk limbs, drives hail that rattles off skulls like gravel. The people crouch under the overhang, listening to their field take punishment. When the sky clears, they run down slope and find the rye pressed sideways, stems kinked but not broken. The flagged ear lies in the mud, half its seeds gone. Carda kneels, palms the remainder, and eats them one by one, a private communion, bitter with chaff. She keeps 2 seeds, slips them into the hem of her dress. Insurance again. Summer lengthens. The grains fatten, harden, turn the color of lion hides. Harvest day is chosen by consensus. The moon must be waning, the morning calm, the dew heavy enough to soften awns, but not so heavy as to invite mold. They cut with the same bone sickles, but now the motion feels sacramental. Each swing releases a faint perfume of green hay and mineral dust. Children gather the fallen grains, no longer scavengers, but acolytes. By evening the field is stubble, the overhang is carpeted with sheaves, and the people are too tired to celebrate. They eat a paste of roasted grain and crushed figs, licking it from their fingers like cats. That night, Garda dreams of the river. It rises not with water, but with seeds, billions of them, each carrying a tiny reflection of the moon. They flow uphill, past the ridge, past the camp, past the limestone bluff, until the whole world is ankle-deep in pale, reflective grains. She wakes before dawn, heart hammering, and walks outside. The real moon is low, the real stubble silvered by its light. She squats, presses her palm against the cut stems, and feels a faint vibration, residual warmth, perhaps, or the echo of growth. She understands without words that the field is now a memory stored in soil rather than in human minds. Next season the memory will sprout again, altered slightly, carrying forward whatever choices were made today. They thresh with flint-bladed paddles, winnow in the wind, pour the clean grain back into the original basket. The yield is modest, enough to feed the band for 40 days if stretched with fish and bulbs, enough to plant again threefold if risked. No one calculates, they simply know. The excess is buried in a pit lined with reed mats and covered with a stone. A child is stationed to pee on the ground above, discouraging jackals by scent. The arrangement feels eternal, though it will last only until hunger sharpens. Winter comes early. The depression freezes. The rye pit becomes a lump of iron earth. They dig into it reluctantly, one handful at a time, mixing the grain with pounded acorn to make it last. Each bite tastes of obligation. Carter finds herself counting days until the ground softens enough to plant again. She has become, without noticing, a creature synchronized to a cycle larger than human life. Soil, seed, shoot, grain, soil. The band still moves, upstream for spring fishing, uphill for summer roots, but always they return. Always they reopen the row, now lengthened to 100 paces, now curved like a sickle to follow the contour of the slope. Years compress into decades. Children who once gathered stray grains now stride the field with sickles of their own. The pale, tight-headed rye has become the only rye they know. The wild stands downhill are referred to as the old kind, spoken of in the same tone once reserved for myths. Bones of the dead are buried beneath the perimeter stones, turning the field into a quiet necropolis. Carter's hair grays, cracks deepening around her mouth like drought-riven mud. She still walks the rows, but now she is followed by daughters who imitate her limp, her habit of cupping an ear to feel its weight, her private ritual of tasting 2 raw grains before harvest. None of them realizes they are rehearsing liturgy. One spring, the river shifts so radically that it cuts a new channel miles away. The valley floor dries into cracked polygons. Tamarisk roots hiss as they pull back from salt. The wild rye vanishes, every last stand. People from downstream arrive, gaunt, carrying sickles of unfamiliar design. They speak of hunger, of children whose bellies swell like ripe heads. The Abu Huraira people share bread, acorn paste, even the seed from their pit, though it means next year's planting will be thinner. The strangers stay help weeding, learn at the curve of the row. They marry, borrow flint, adopt the 3-note harvest hymn. And so the tight-headed rye spreads, not by conquest but by hospitality, carried in pouches, hems, hair braids, the creases of skin where grain dust settles. It moves north to the plateau, east to the Tigris, west until it meets salt flats, always accompanied by the same slow rituals. Select the fattest, spare the earliest, bury the excess, taste 2 raw. Villages coalesce, then towns, then cities, whose names will be carved in cuneiform. But the fundamental act remains the one Carter performed absently, thumb and forefinger pinched together, choosing tomorrow's bread from today's chaos. Eventually, someone invents the word farmer, and the world divides into before and after. Yet, if you could stand beside the original ridge at Abu Huraira, you would still recognize the rye, pale, compact, unwilling to shatter. It grows now under irrigation ditches and property walls, but it remembers the woman who spared the first strange head, who pressed seeds into silt, who tasted 2 grains and let the rest live. The field remembers too, every footstep, every burial, every drought survived, every stranger fed. Memory is stored in gluten, in chaff, in the faint mineral taste that lingers on the tongue long after swallowing. You, drifting towards sleep, might wonder whether Garda ever looked back across her life and saw the magnitude of what she had begun. The answer is probably no. She died, as everyone does, in a season that felt ordinary. A mild fever, a week in the shade, a final request for a thin gruel made from the first of the new grain. Her daughters buried her at the upper edge of the field, marking the spot with a flat slab of limestone, no different from the ones that outline the rows. The rye continued, patient, implacable, carrying her choices forward into every future harvest. And that is the entire secret of the agricultural revolution. Not a trumpet blast, not a prophet, not a sudden leap of intellect, but a quiet woman with aching knees who one season decided to leave one plant alone, and the next season did it again, and then could not imagine stopping. The world changed because she kept showing up, because her children copied her limp, because strangers arrived hungry and were fed. Civilization rose on the simple, boring miracle of persistence, and the rye still whispers it every time you bite into a sandwich. We remember, we remember, we remember. You are trudging behind a column of exhausted villagers along the south bank of the Yellow River. Spring of the year we now call 2600 BCE, though no one here has numbered anything except full moons and deliveries of babies. The river is not yellow today. It is the color of liquid clay, a hue that stains tighter than dye. Every garment you see carries a cuffline of permanent umber, as if the earth itself is trying to crawl up the sleeves and reclaim the skin it lost. The flood arrived 3 weeks late, lingered 2 weeks long, and withdrew only far enough to reveal fields that look like freshly poured batter. There is no drama now, no roaring wall of water, no lightning-split sky, only the slow ooze of silt-laden mud that seeps into sandals and refuses to let go. Each step makes a sound like a tongue leaving the roof of a mouth. The villagers have been walking since dawn, carrying whatever the river did not dissolve: a bronze hoe head, a half-basket of millet, a baby too listless to cry. They are headed toward a low, loess ridge where the ground is still solid enough to support a hut. At the front strides a woman named Lian Tzu. She is neither chief nor priestess. She simply walks faster than anyone else, and so the column lengthens or contracts according to her pace. Her skirt is hitched high, revealing calves painted reddish-brown to the knee. She has misplaced her husband somewhere between the third and fourth meander. She has not asked the river whether it minds. Every so often she pauses, scoops a handful of silt, rubs it between her palms and sniffs the residue. The smell tells her how much organic matter the flood has donated, how much salt it has stolen, how long before anything edible will root here again. By midday, the ridge appears, a rumpled spine of loess topped with spindly elm. The climb is slippery. People crawl on all fours, nails packing with earth the color of old bones. At the crest, they collapse, not from relief but from the sudden absence of motion. Lian Tzu remains standing, surveying the new lake that was yesterday their world. From this height, the floodplain looks like a giant kneading board, the river a lazy arm folding dough. She notes, almost absently, that the water has deposited a fan of darker silt across what used to be the communal millet patch. The fan begins at the breach point and spreads southward like a spilled sleeve. Someone begins to cry, a soft hiccuping sound that quickly infects others. Lian Tzu does not cry. She is calculating how long a family can survive on cattail rhizomes and duck eggs, how soon the mud will crack into plates navigable by foot, how many seasons of painstaking hoe work it will take to convince millet to trust this ground again. She is also wondering, though she would never speak it, whether the river has done them a hidden favor. Last year's soil was exhausted. Stalks had grown short, ears sparse, the taste of the grain faintly bitter. Now, beneath the smothering layer of silt, lies a freshly written blankness. A boy tugs her sleeve. He holds out a single sprig of something green that he found growing sideways from the face of the ridge. The leaves are narrow, the roots already bound into a fist of lows. Lian Tzu recognizes it as a wild ancestor of soy, a plant respectable only as famine food. Yet here it is, volunteering on vertical dirt that never saw seed. She takes the sprig, plants it again at the lip of the slope, and presses the soil with her thumb. The gesture is instinctive, almost devotional. She does not know that she is rehearsing the founding act of Chinese agriculture. She simply wants to see whether the plant will survive the afternoon wind. Night arrives without color. There is no firewood. They burn dried reed and the smell is sour. Children curl like shrimp around empty bellies. Adults speak in murmurs about relatives further south, about rumors of a settlement built on stilts, about the possibility of walking there before the millet runs out. Lian Tzu listens but contributes nothing. She is still smelling the silt, still seeing the dark fan across the ruined field. An idea is forming, slow as the river itself. What if they do not rebuild on the ridge? What if they descend while the mud is still workable, shape ridges and furrows before the clay sets, trap the silt exactly where it is most needed? The notion feels dangerous, akin to telling the river where to deposit its burden, but danger is already everywhere. Before sleep, she walks to the far side of the ridge. Here, the slope drops abruptly to a side channel that has already begun to drain. The mud is crazed with tension cracks, each crack wide enough to swallow a thumb. She kneels, prizes one crack open, and finds the walls lined with a ribbon of dark, almost oily silt. She licks it, sweet mineral alive. The layer is thinner than her little finger, yet it contains more plant food than a hand width of the old topsoil. She understands bone deep that the flood has paid rent. The question is whether they can arrange to receive that rent every year without also accepting destruction. She returns to the sleeping bodies, lies down, and stares upward where stars should be. Clouds hide them. The darkness is absolute. She listens to the soft, sucking sound the ridge makes as it settles, and she imagines the same sound repeated across the entire plain, a continent sighing under its new blanket. Somewhere downstream a levee has broken. She can hear the distant hiss of water seeking new lows. The noise is monotonous, almost soothing, and in that monotony she senses possibility. If the river can be persuaded to break gently, to spread its gift without smothering the recipient, then maybe, just maybe, the same catastrophe can be coaxed into becoming a calendar. But persuasion, she knows, is not a matter of prayer. It will require labor measured in lifetimes, shovels measured in forests, discipline measured in stomachs. She closes her eyes, pictures an endless chessboard of raised beds, each bordered by a ditch that can swallow overflow and guide it away before the main torrent arrives. The image is exhausting, yet it glows faintly, like embers under ash. She falls asleep holding the picture, and the ridge beneath her dreams continues its imperceptible slide toward the river that made it. You, listening across 46 centuries, might expect a triumphal trumpet at this moment, but there is only the mud exhaling, and a woman whose fingers still smell of silt, deciding that tomorrow she will walk the plain and begin counting paces. By dawn, the clouds have torn into pale rags. Lianzu descends alone, sandals tied around her neck, so she can feel the mud's temperature. It is cold, but not bitingly so. The top finger width has begun to crust, while everything below remains plastic, like half-dried pottery. She steps, waits, listens. The suction releases her foot with a reluctant clop. She takes another step, then another, counting under her breath. At 100 paces she stops, turns, and studies her prints. They fill slowly with seep water, each a miniature pond reflecting a fragment of sky. She begins to walk a grid, 10 paces north, turn, 10 paces south, repeating until she has carved a ragged chessboard whose squares are defined by nothing more than heel prints. Where a print collapses, she marks the spot with a reed stuck upright. By midday, she has mapped an area the size of 2 house plots. The exercise is meaningless to any observer, but in her mind it is the first draft of an irrigation lattice. She notes that the northern edge is firmer, less silt, more sand, while the southern edge is still a slurry. The difference is subtle, yet it will determine where ridges can rise high and where ditches must stay shallow. When she climbs back to the ridge at sunset, the column watches her approach with the blankness of people who have already surrendered. She stands before them, mud crackling on her shins, and states simply, "We can grow food down there again, sooner than you think." No cheers answer her. Hunger has burned away credulity. Yet the statement lingers, a small stone dropped into the well of collective imagination. That night, 2 adolescent boys ask to accompany her tomorrow. She agrees on the condition that they remain barefoot and speak only when spoken to. They nod solemnly as if initiating into a mystery. They return the next morning with 50 reed stakes cut from the marsh. Together they retrace her grid, driving a stake at every corner. The stakes wobble, but their presence transforms abstract paces into property, though no one yet thinks in terms of ownership. Lian Tzu assigns each square a name: soft belly, crab shell, willow breath, labels drawn from texture and smell rather than geometry. The boys memorize them with the avidity of children learning a secret language. By the end of the week, they can walk the grid blindfolded, calling out names that sound like love whispers to the mud. Word seeps outward. A widower from the next ridge appears, offering labor in exchange for a share of whatever crop results. He brings a bronze hoe, the metal still bright where the river did not scour it. Lian Tzu accepts the tool but refuses the share. She wants partners, not tenants. The widower shrugs, begins digging a trench that will later become the main drainage ditch. His strokes are economical, almost meditative. The blade lifts slabs of silt that smell faintly of fish. Each slab is piled upslope, forming the embryo of a levee. Passers-by pause, watch, then drift away. Yet the next morning, some return with shovels fashioned from broken halberds, turtle shells, even a giant scapula from an ox that drowned in the flood. The ditch lengthens at the pace of conversation, one span per anecdote, one culvert per rumor. Someone mentions that millet roots dislike standing water longer than 3 days. Another counters that soy tolerates wet feet, but only if the soil breathes. No one knows how they know. Knowledge floats on the air like pollen, settling where it is needed. Lian Tzu listens more than she speaks. She has begun to understand that authority here will be measured not by commands, but by the accuracy of her silences. By the waxing of the next moon, the grid has become a landscape of low ridges separated by ankle-deep canals. The work is still crude, banks slump, water finds low spots and pools, but the outline is unmistakable. When the next modest flood arrives, carried by a seasonal rise rather than a breach, the canals swallow the surplus and guide it eastward into the marsh. The ridges stay above water. Millet seed, sown hastily the night before, germinates in straight green lines that look absurdly artificial against the chaotic plain. Visitors arrive simply to stare at the geometry, then go home and dream of straight lines in their own fields. Yet success breeds new anxieties. The millet is ankle-high when a delegation from upstream appears, demanding that the new canals be blocked lest they steal water from traditional floodlands. Their logic is ancient. The river gives, the river takes, humans accept. Lian Tzu meets them on the bund, barefoot, hands caked to the wrist. She offers no argument. Instead, she scoops a cup of canal water and pours it slowly onto the foot of the eldest delegate. The gesture is ambiguous: gift, insult, demonstration, but the message is clear. The water is here, it is controlled, it will not rush uphill to deprive anyone. The delegation withdraws grumbling, yet one youth lingers. He asks to stay and learn. Lian Tzu hands him a shovel. Seasons begin to cycle with unnatural precision. Spring, repair breaches, thicken ridges. Summer, guide small floods, weed vigorously. Autumn, harvest, thresh, bury surplus. Winter, burn stubble, spread ash, plan next year's expansion. Each task is boring, repetitive, and memorized by bodies rather than codified in speech. Children who grow up walking the canals develop calves like bridge cables. They can jump a ditch of any width without measuring. Their lullabies are lists of botanical names set to the rhythm of footfalls. Millet, soy, sesbania, hemp. A litany that sounds like counting sheep. Lian Tzu grows lean, almost translucent. She eats last, sleeps least, carries water until her shoulders bow. One dawn she finds grey in her hair and realizes that 20 years have passed since the Great Flood. The grid has expanded to a lattice of islands covering 3 square li, An area larger than any single family could work, yet families cluster anyway, drawn by the security of shared walls and shared water. A village stirs awake, granaries on stilts, threshing floors of tamped loess, a communal oven shaped like a beehive. The place has no name. When strangers ask, inhabitants point to the river and shrug. Names are for places that might be forgotten. This place intends to remain. But memory is porous. Young adults who never saw the original catastrophe begin to treat the canals as natural features, gifts from forgotten ancestors or river spirits. They grow lax about weeding, sloppy about bank maintenance. Lian-Tzu scolds, cajoles, occasionally strikes with a reed, but her authority is eroding along with the banks. One spring, a breach occurs, not through violent flood, but through neglect. A muskrat burrow, left unplugged, tunnels beneath a main bund. Water pours through in daylight, leisurely, almost polite. By the time it is staunched, 2 ridges have slumped and millet lies flat like hair after fever. The village convenes. Accusations fly. Blood is threatened. Lian-Tzu stands, waits for noise to exhaust itself, then speaks quietly. The river remembers every footprint. If we forget, it reminds us. She offers no punishment, only a schedule. 3 days of communal labor to repair, then a new rule: every family must walk its section of bank each dawn and report anomalies by sunset. The rule is accepted because it is easier than continuing to shout. Yet something has shifted. People now speak of Lian-Tzu's method as if it were an external invention, rather than the gradual accretion of their own hands. She hears the phrase and feels the loneliness of the misattributed. That night, she walks the repaired bund alone. Moonlight paints the canals pewter. Millet seedlings rustle like tiny spectators. She realizes that the system has outgrown its maker. It will survive her, perhaps fail without her, perhaps evolve into something unrecognizable. The thought is neither sad nor joyful, merely factual, like the chill that rises through her soles. She squats, scoops a handful of ridge soil, and lets it slide through her fingers. The silt glows faintly, phosphorescent with trapped moonlight. She whispers a phrase that will later be remembered as proverb. We do not stand on the earth. We stand on yesterday's mud. Then she rises, wipes her hands on her dress, and walks home to the unnamed village that will one day call itself the center of the world. You, half asleep, might wonder whether she ever felt triumph. The answer is no. Only the exhausted satisfaction of someone who has persuaded a river to deposit its riches precisely where human hunger can reach them, an arrangement so precarious that it must be renegotiated every single dawn. The negotiation continues long after her bones have settled into the ridge, and the creak of shovels keeps rhythm with the breathing of countless generations who will never know her name, yet inherit the straight lines she once drew with heel prints in wet mud. Another 40 floods. Lian-Tzu is now a bent silhouette who moves at the speed of cloud shadow. The village has acquired a name, Gulijan, dog lizard Jen, supposedly because a dog once chased a lizard into the granary, and both were found months later, fat and cohabiting. The name is unromantic, unheroic, unforgettable. Around it has grown a palisade of tamarisk posts, more symbolic than defensive. Inside the palisade stand 32 houses of rammed earth, a threshing floor wide enough for 2 oxen, and a watchtower made from a repurposed well ring. From the tower, one can see the entire lattice of ridges stretching away like a gigantic weaving experiment abandoned mid-pattern. The population has doubled, then doubled again. Infants learn to crawl on ridge tops. Toddlers fall harmlessly into canals whose banks have been gentled by seasons of bare feet, yet prosperity carries its own boredom. Young men, restless, gamble away grain during long winters. Women compose songs whose choruses are lists of seed varieties. The songs sound like lullabies but contain sophisticated advice on rotation schedules. Everyone speaks in the measured cadences of people who have watched silt settle. Nothing is urgent. Everything is cumulative. Lian Tzu, now addressed as Old Aunt rather than by name, spends her days seated on a reed mat, carving miniature ridges into blocks of river clay. The blocks serve as teaching aids. Children arrange canals, predict flood paths, then pour water and watch the miniature landscape erode. When the water drains, they patch the breaches with fresh clay and start again. The game is endlessly repetitive, oddly soothing, and it trains minds to think in contour lines rather than in straight property. No one realizes that they are playing with the world's first agricultural simulator. One summer, the Yellow River delivers a flood so gentle it is almost a caress. Water slides into canals without overflowing, deposits a thumb width of silt, then recedes 3 days early. The crop responds with explosive vigor. Stalks grow taller than a man, ears so heavy they bend like bows. Harvest yields triple the normal quota. Granaries overflow. Grain is stored in wicker cages hung from trees to deter rats. For the first time in living memory, hunger is not the background note of existence. People grow giddy, then reckless. Mid-autumn festivals last half a moon. Someone invents a fermented drink of millet and wild honey. Young couples sneak into the fields and return with chaff in their hair. Lian Tzu watches the celebrations from the edge, expression unreadable. When the revelry peaks, she asks for a fresh block of clay. Before an audience too tipsy to notice, she sculpts a ridge twice as high as normal, gouges a canal twice as deep, then pours water from a gourd. The miniature landscape collapses in seconds, slumping into formless soup. She says nothing, but the lesson is remembered next dawn when heads throb and tongues feel like bark. A council is convened. Regulations are drafted. No ridge higher than knee, no canal deeper than waist. Surplus grain to be stored in 3 separate pits, each sealed with ash and lime. The rules feel puritanical after the season of excess. Yet they are accepted because the image of collapsing clay is still vivid. Years later, no one counts exactly, another great flood arrives, this one angry. A typhoon far upstream funnels runoff into the channel. The river rises 6 thumbs above the highest levee. The village assembles at night, torches guttering in rain, to watch water chew through the outer berm. There is no panic. People move with the choreographed calm of a ritual rehearsed since childhood. Old women carry infants uphill. Young men chop tamarisk and wattle, filling breaches with sledges of brushwood weighted by stones. Children stagger beneath bundles of reed, their small footprints erasing even as they form. Lian Tzu stands at the main sluice, directing the opening of emergency spillways that will flood the fallow southern quadrant, but save the inhabited core. Her voice is hoarse yet steady. The torchlight carves deep shadows into her face, making her skull resemble the clay blocks she once carved. By dawn the river is spent. Half the ridges are gone, half the canals choked, yet the granaries on their stilts remain dry. No one has drowned, though 2 elders die within the month from fever contracted while standing in cold water. Reconstruction begins immediately, not as tragedy, but as continuation. People sing while they shovel, the same rotation songs once murmured to infants, now belted out in hoarse triumph. Outsiders arrive, refugees from less prepared hamlets, and are integrated without ceremony. They learn the songs within a week. Lian Tzu, exhausted, contracts a cough that never quite leaves her. She continues to sit on her mat, but now the clay blocks are carried to her. Children present their breeches. She traces a finger along the fracture line, nods or shakes her head. One autumn she is too weak to climb the watchtower. From her doorstep she can still see the glint of water in canals, the gold of millet on threshing floor. She asks for a bowl of plain millet porridge, eats half, and hands the rest back untouched. That night she calls no one, speaks no farewell. She simply stops breathing, as quietly as a seed finishes absorbing water. Burial is immediate, unadorned. She is laid in a trench dug through the ridge she first mapped with heel prints. The grave is shallow. The millet roots will find her, draw her upward, turn her into bread. A new reed mat is woven to cover the spot, and children are told to walk softly there for one full cycle of the moon. Then memory loosens. Within 2 generations she is the old aunt who taught mud. Within 5 she is a local spirit who steadies canal banks if you leave her a pinch of grain. The village continues, expands, eventually becomes a county seat. Records are kept on bamboo slips. The slips rot, are copied, rot again. Her name disappears, yet every ridge still carries the slope she prescribed, every canal the width of her outstretched arms. You, drifting towards sleep, might imagine that the story ends with apotheosis. It does not. It ends with a team of engineers in the 20th century excavating the ruins of Gouligen. They find the lattice intact, recognize it as an early example of controlled flood retreat agriculture, and publish papers giving credit to anonymous Chinese farmers. The engineers never learn that the original designer was a woman who once walked barefoot across wet silt, counting paces, sniffing earth, trusting the river to remember its half of the bargain. Yet the bargain holds. Every spring the yellow river still rises, still deposits silt, still retreats, and the fields still produce grain for a nation that has forgotten why the ridges run exactly north-south, why the canals widen at the bend, why children still sing lullabies that list seed varieties like counting sheep. The contract is renewable each dawn, negotiated by shovels and calloused feet. It will continue as long as someone walks the bund at sunrise, checking for muskrat burrows, listening for the faint hiss of escaping water. Lian Tzu's legacy is not a monument but a posture. Slight forward lean, knees relaxed, eyes scanning for the first crack in the clay. You may adopt it yourself next time you stand by any slow river. Feel the silt shift beneath your soles, and remember that every loaf of bread begins with someone willing to believe that yesterday's mud can be persuaded to become tomorrow's dinner. Again and again and again. You are following a broad-shouldered man named Charles Townshend as he strolls across a field near Rainham in the county of Norfolk. England, autumn of the year 1730. The sun is the colour of weak cider. The wind smells of salt from the North Sea 10 miles away, and the ground beneath his buckled shoes is so light that every footfall squeaks. Townshend is 58, retired from politics, banished from London society for quarrelling too loudly over foreign policy. He has no estate office to occupy him, no committee to chair, no mistress to impress. He has only 800 acres of sandy loam and an obsessive suspicion that the land is being cheated. He walks with a thumb-sized notebook, stopping every 20 paces to crouch and count the volunteer plants emerging among the stubble of the barley just harvested. He records sheep sorrel 12, chickweed 8, couch 3, rogue rye 1. The numbers are minuscule, the activity ridiculous to any labourer watching, yet Townshend behaves as if these digits were verses of scripture. He sniffs the soil, rubs it between forefinger and thumb, tastes it. Sandy, slightly acid, hungry. He knows that if he does nothing, the volunteers will multiply over winter, drawing fertility that should belong to next year's crop. He also knows that ploughing now would expose the land to rain, leaching nutrients and blowing the top layer into the sea. An idea nags him, not new, but newly insistent. What if the next occupant of this field were not wheat or barley, but a plant whose sole purpose is to smother weeds and feed livestock at the same time? He has seen clover and ryegrass perform this trick in the pastures of the Low Countries. The objection is obvious. Turning arable land over to fodder means less bread for humans. Yet bread has been cheap for 10 years. Wool and mutton have not. And the estate's sheep are presently nibbling meadows so closely that the roots show like balding scalps. He straightens, notebook snapping shut. A decision forms, boring in its quietness, 1/3 of the arable will be sown with turnips, another third with clover, the final third with barley, followed by wheat, in a rotation that never allows bare earth. The plan is so simple it seems childish. He expects ridicule from the bailiff, from his sons, from the neighbouring gentry who already call him Turnip Townshend behind his back. He expects, in short, the ordinary penalty for boring originality. He gives the order anyway. Seed is drilled. Townshend owns one of Jethro Tull's newfangled drill ploughs, a contraption that drops grain at precise intervals so that cultivation can proceed between rows without waste. The labourers distrust the machine. They prefer the familiarity of broadcasting by hand, the ritual swing of the wicker seed lip. Townshend insists, cajoles, finally stands behind the drill himself, guiding the horse with one hand while cranking the seed box with the other. The result looks absurdly sparse. Neat rows with bare earth between, yet by spring the turnips have closed canopy, choking weeds that would otherwise have consumed a third of the barley's food. Summer brings an unexpected drought. Wheat on neighbouring estates yellows and aborts. Townshend's turnips, roots still succulent, keep sheep alive that would otherwise have been slaughtered for lack of fodder. The animals graze the field in portable folds, depositing manure exactly where next year's barley will grow. Townshend visits daily, notebook in hand, recording weight gains, dung density, leaf colour. He begins to speak of soil capital as if it were a bank account. He treats manure like interest compounded overnight. Visitors tour the estate, murmur polite approval, then return home to mock the obsession over dinner. Autumn arrives wet. The clover, now a year old, has rooted so densely that a spade cannot penetrate without a kick. Its roots fix nitrogen that the barley will greedily absorb. Its stems provide autumn grazing for cattle, whose bellies hang like full sails. Townshend stands at the field edge, cloak plastered to his shoulders, and feels a quiet upwelling that might be called joy if joy were ever admitted in Norfolk. He sees, without fantasy but with steely clarity, that the rotation can cycle indefinitely. Roots, fodder, grain, grain, roots, fodder, grain, grain. 4 courses, always moving, never fallow. The word fallow begins to sound medieval in his mind, akin to bleeding a patient or sentencing a thief to the stocks. Yet triumph remains private. He writes no pamphlet, addresses no society, cultivates no disciples. He simply repeats the sequence across every acre he owns, then leases more land so he can repeat it again. The labourers grow weary of his questions. How many weeds did you pull? How many sheep grazed? How much dung collected? But they also notice that wages are steady, that bread remains on the table even in bad years, that their children's legs straighten rather than bow from rickets. Ridicule softens into resigned affection. Turnip Townshend becomes a nickname spoken with a smile, the way one might speak of an eccentric uncle who insists on counting the silver after every feast. And so the boring triumph begins, not with fireworks but with ledger entries, not with slogans but with the soft thud of turnip roots dropping into wooden barrows, not with revolution but with the quiet compounding of soil capital measured in weed counts per square yard. You, listening in the dark, might drift off before the real miracle arrives, yet that is precisely the point. The miracle is designed to be boring, to slip past the drama of history unnoticed, like a servant who refills the candle without being asked, but the story is not finished. Before winter closes the ground, Townshend notices a small, persistent weed growing only where the clover has been grazed too short. He has no name for it. Later botanists will call it black grass, a stealthy invader that thrives on continuous cultivation. He squats, counts, 15 plants in a patch the size of a hearthrug, then digs one up. The roots are white, fibrous, breaking easily, a plant built for rapid colonization. He realizes that the four-course system, by eliminating fallow, has removed the old cultural reset that once kept such weeds in check. The discovery is unsettling, like finding mold in a carefully tended larder. He pockets the specimen, intending to study it after supper, then forgets it in the pocket of his waistcoat where it will germinate and die, leaving a faint stain like a prophecy. The question he falls asleep with is simple. Can the system out-evolve its own weaknesses, or will the weeds eventually inherit the earth he has so meticulously enriched? The answer lies seasons ahead, in experiments he will perform with hand lenses and vinegar solutions, in conversations with vicars who dabble in botany, in letters to London societies that will finally grant him fellowship under the formal title Turnip Townshend. For now, the fire settles, the account books close, and the turnip field dreams under frost, its roots sweetening slowly, preparing to feed sheep that will in turn feed the barley, that will in turn feed the people who will never know how close the weeds came to winning. Spring brings mud that smells faintly of turnip sugar. Townshend, now 62, kneels in the clover lay with a surgeon's curiosity. He has acquired a Dutch hand lens ground from bottle glass. Through it he studies root nodules the size of pinheads, pinkish clusters that look like miniature grapes. He knows these house bacteria that extract nitrogen from air and trade it to the plant for sugar. He does not know the bacteria have Latin names, but he can see that soil clinging to nodulated roots is darker, crumbier, more alive. He begins to equate the nodule with a coin minted in subterranean darkness, a currency that enriches both parties. The labourers think him mad, crouching for hours, eyes watering, counting nodules on clover roots the way a miser counts coins. Yet the data accumulate. Fields that host 2 years of clover produce barley yields 30% higher than those rotated straight from turnips to grain. He records the figure, whistles softly, then closes the notebook. 30% is not dramatic. It is the kind of margin that slips past notice in sermons or newspapers. But compounded across 500 acres, it means an extra 200 barrels of barley, which means an extra 40 pounds of silver, which means new roofs for the labourers' cottages, which means children who no longer sleep 3 to a bed, breathing feathers and tuberculosis. He begins to experiment with mixtures, red clover versus white, ryegrass versus timothy, the timing of grazing versus cutting for hay. Each comparison is repeated on plots no larger than a parlour rug, the results recorded in ink mixed from soot and egg white. Visitors find the sight hilarious, an earl crawling on all fours, peasants watching with arms folded, everyone speaking in measured whispers as if the plants might be offended. Townshend ignores them. He has discovered that mockery is simply curiosity wearing a mask, and that the mask drops the moment neighbours see lambs fattening on clover leaves, while their own pasture resembles a threadbare carpet. By midsummer, the black grass has returned, thicker. He identifies it correctly as a wild relative of cultivated oat, a fact that disturbs him more than ignorance would. Kinship implies the weed can interbreed with the crop, swapping genes the way travellers swap gossip. He begins roguing, walking the rows at dawn, pulling every suspicious plant before it sets seed. The work is hypnotic. Bend, grip, twist, drop into a sack, step forward, repeat. After an hour, his back aches. After a day, his fingertips are stained green. He calculates that each black grass head sheds precisely 300 seeds, which means the sack on his shoulder contains roughly 50,000 potential enemies. He burns the sack in a special pit, covers the ash with lime, then records the number in red ink, a colour reserved for threats. Word spreads that Turnip Townshend has declared war on a weed no one can see without stooping. Local wags compose a ballad. Old Lordy and the black grass, they fight from dawn till dusk. The grass it grows a step ahead, the Lordy learns to husk. The song is sung in taverns. Townshend hears it, smiles thinly, and orders an extra pint for the singer. He understands that ridicule is a form of distribution. The more people laugh, the more they remember. Some neighbours begin roguing their own fields, if only to avoid being the butt of the next verse. The weed's territory shrinks, not erased but contained, like a border nation grudgingly tributary. Autumn brings the first visit from a London society, a shy vicar with ink-stained fingers who wishes to inspect the root nodules. Townshend obliges, demonstrating the Dutch lens, the counting method, the red ink tally of blackgrass heads. The vicar departs with packets of clover seed and a head full of numbers. 6 months later, a pamphlet appears concerning the fixation of airborne nitre by leguminous plants in rotation with cereal crops, as observed in Norfolk. The author thanks an unnamed nobleman for hospitality. Townshend reads the pamphlet, says nothing, but orders 20 extra copies and distributes them to neighbouring landlords. The idea, like clover itself, begins to nodulate in foreign soil, yet triumph is brittle. The very success of the four-course system drives up land values. Rents rise, small tenants sell out, fields grow larger, hedges are grubbed to make rectangles efficient for the drill. The landscape simplifies, becoming a chessboard of bright green versus vivid emerald, interrupted only by the pale gold of harvest. Skylarks lose nesting sites. Partridge decline. Hawks follow suit. Townshend notices the silence, fewer cries overhead, fewer flushes underfoot, but tells himself that feeding humans outweighs the aesthetic of wildness. He is right, yet the rightness feels thin, like a coat of paint over soft wood. One winter evening he sits by the fire calculating next year's seed rates. His eldest son, a diplomat lately returned from Vienna, lounges nearby reading gazettes. Suddenly the son laughs. "Father, they are calling your rotation a national treasure in Parliament. One member proposes a statue in St. James's Park, a turnip in heroic size." Townshend looks up, blinks, then returns to his column of figures. After a long pause, he mutters, "Tell them the statue will do no good unless it is drilled at 2-inch intervals." The son chuckles. Yet the joke carries a metallic aftertaste. The system has escaped its maker, become a political token, a moral lesson, a certainty. Certainties, Townshend knows, are fertile ground for calamity. He closes the ledger, rubs his eyes and rises. Outside, frost lies on the turnip field like powdered glass. He walks between the rows, boots squeaking, and listens. The silence is deeper than he remembers. No rustle of small mammals, no owl cry, only the faint creak of roots expanding as they freeze. He realizes that the four-course rotation, by eliminating weeds and fallow, has also eliminated the messy edges where wild creatures lived. The perfection of the system is its flaw. It works too well, produces too much, races too thoroughly. The question he carries back indoors is uncomfortable. Can abundance become a kind of famine, a famine of complexity? And if so, is the farmer morally obliged to reintroduce disorder, strip a hedge here, leave a weed patch there, so that something other than wheat and sheep and humans can find a foothold? He has no answer, only a vague resolve to experiment next season with a half-acre left, intentionally ragged. The resolve is noted in pencil, not ink, as if even he doubts his own courage to imperil efficiency. You, drifting towards sleep, might imagine that the old man closes his notebooks satisfied. Instead, he closes them unsettled, aware that every solved problem begets an unnoticed one, that the black grass is merely the scout for an entire army of specialists waiting to adapt to the new order. Tomorrow he will rogue again, count again, burn again. But tonight he sits by dying coals, listening to frost split a distant turnip, and wonders whether the true crop he has cultivated is not turnip or clover or barley, but faith in continuity itself, a faith as fragile as root, nodules, and as necessary as bread. The following decades bring a curious peace. Black grass, consistently rogued, declines to nuisance levels. Yields stabilise at levels previously considered mythical. Rents throughout Norfolk rise. Smaller landlords imitate the rotation. Turnip becomes so common that London parlourmaids refuse to serve it, claiming aristocratic overexposure. Townshend, knighted at last, acquiesces to a portrait in which he holds neither sword nor scroll, but a perfectly spherical turnip. The painter, seeking grandeur, adds a thundercloud in the background. Townshend insists it be replaced with a clear sky, arguing that the real drama lies in the absence of drama. Yet evolution never sleeps. Around the year 1760, a new strain of black grass appears, shorter, darker, ripening 3 days earlier than its predecessor. It also ripens underground. The seeds detach while still inside the sheath, dropping directly into the soil like paratroopers behind enemy lines. Roguing becomes futile. By the time a head is visible, the next generation has already deployed. Townshend, now in his mid-80s, hand lenses failing, senses rather than sees the shift. Yields begin a subtle decline, 1%, then 2, too small to alarm anyone who has not spent a lifetime counting. He responds the only way he knows, by intensifying observation. He hires a local boy to walk every acre weekly, collecting suspicious heads in paper envelopes. The boy, eager to please, brings hundreds. Townshend spends winter evenings dissecting them under candlelight, counting seeds, noting color variations. He discovers that the new strain produces an average of 380 seeds per head, 80 more than the old, and that the seeds can survive burial for at least 5 years, waiting for the precise disturbance that drilling provides. The data comfort him. Quantified, the enemy seems manageable. Yet the numbers also imply that each season's roguing removes perhaps 5% of the potential seed bank. At that rate, the weed will win in a century, sooner if labor grows scarce. He tries delaying drilling, sowing later in autumn when soil is colder and germination slower. Blackgrass, equally cold-tolerant, merely waits. He experiments with deeper ploughing, hoping to bury seeds beyond emergence energy. They rise anyway, stems elongating until they breach the surface. He considers fallowing, but fallowing would break the four-course covenant and return him to the wasteful medieval system he despises. The dilemma is stark. The rotation that conquered scarcity also incubates its own destroyer. One March dawn, too stiff to kneel, he sits on a 3-legged stool and watches the sun pink the ridge of a turnip field. A lark rises singing a sound he has not noticed in years. The bird climbs, trills, drops, vanishes into a hedgerow that he, in frustration at inefficiency, once considered removing. The moment is unremarkable, yet something loosens inside him. He realizes that the hedgerow, by providing habitat for the lark, also harbors insects and fungi and bacteria that might, just might, prey upon or outcompete black grass seeds. The thought is vague, unquantified, yet it glows with the attractiveness of paradox. Perhaps the way to save the rotation is to reintroduce the very wildness the rotation eliminated. He sketches a plan: devote one boundary strip in every field to a chaotic mix of native grasses, thorn, and wildflowers. Allow sheep to graze it only lightly so that ground-nesting birds and small mammals return. Let the strip serve as both refuge and recruiting ground for organisms that eat, rot, or infect weed seeds. The idea appalls his steward. Uncultivated land means lost revenue. But Townshend, aware that death is nearer than bankruptcy, overrules. The first strip is sown by hand, mixed seed thrown broadcast like a medieval blessing. Within a season, it is alive with mice, beetles, finches, and, crucially, a mold that attacks grass seeds in the soil. Black grass emergence drops by 15% along the edge, 10% in the adjacent crop. The effect diminishes with distance. Yet the trend is clear. Diversity, not purity, suppresses the specialist. The discovery is too late to save his own yields. Age and inevitability have their arithmetic, but not too late to be copied. Neighbouring estates, faced with the same creeping decline, plant their own ragged edges. The movement spreads, slow as mould, until the Norfolk landscape softens again. Hedgerows thicken, spinneys reappear, skylarks become common enough that parlourmaids complain about droppings on laundry. Blackgrass never disappears. It merely ceases to be a crisis, settling into the category of manageable irritation, like rain on harvest day or mice in the bin store. Townshend dies in 1738, seated by the window with a view across Clovelly to the turnip field beyond. His last act is to close the ledger, place the pencil parallel to the edge, and murmur, "Enough." There is no deathbed revelation, no poetic summation. The maid who finds him notices that his fingers still smell faintly of turnip sap, a scent she will associate with gentleness for the rest of her life. The rotation continues, refined but recognizably his. By the mid-1800s it feeds in industrializing England. By the early 1900s it spreads to the prairies of North America, where the absence of hedgerows requires new forms of diversity, crop rotation with legumes, contour strip cropping, shelter belts of poplar. The principle, however, remains the one Townshend stumbled upon. Abundance must be interrupted by disorder, or it will breed its own exhaustion. You, hovering at the edge of sleep, might wonder what any of this has to do with you. The answer is simple. Every slice of bread you have ever eaten stands at the end of a long line, beginning with a man who once knelt in a sandy field, counting weedlings because he had nothing more dramatic to do. The rotation that fed the Industrial Revolution, that freed labour to tend steam engines and city streets, that underwrote the population boom of the 19th century, began as a retired politician's quiet refusal to let the ground lie idle. His triumph was not heroic. It was bureaucratic, measured in footnotes and weed counts, and the soft thud of turnips into barrows. And the weeds? They are still there, negotiating each new agricultural technology, learning diplomacy, waiting for the next moment of overconfidence. Their patience is geological. Ours, thankfully, is renewed daily by breakfast, an unspoken truce with the descendants of Turnip Townshend, a truce signed in the language of routine, renewed in the act of spreading butter across toast, and broken only when we forget that every field is a parliament where the boring details of survival are debated without ceasing. You are sitting in the loft of a turf and timber house in Thingvellir, Iceland, early June of the year 986. Below, the Alþingi, the world's oldest parliament, has convened for its annual 2-week session. The air is thick with reheated arguments about sheep trespass, blood feud arbitration, and the price of driftwood. Up in the loft, however, the only sound is the soft scratch of a woman named Halvey as she prods a wooden box of sprouting turnip seeds with a feather quill. The loft smells of sour whey, birch smoke, and the sweet, peppery scent of brassicas awakening. Halvey is neither chieftain nor Bondi's wife. She is a foster daughter attached to the booth of the Ascona, literally godwoman, who tends the small chapel established 2 years earlier. Her task is ostensibly to keep the chapel's supply of dried fish free from mice, but she has commandeered a corner for her private experiment. The turnip seeds came from a single root, smuggled in the hem of a Norwegian priest's cloak the previous summer. Turnips are not unknown in Iceland, but they are grown sporadically, often as curiosities in monastery gardens. Halvey intends something more ambitious, a crop reliable enough to supplement the hay shortage that follows every harsh winter. The seedlings are leggy, pale from insufficient light. The loft's turf roof filters the already weak Arctic sun. Halvey compensates by lining the box with reflective shards of mica scavenged from the riverbank. The effect is magical. Tiny green suns mirrored into infinity, yet she feels no wonder, only the slow, patient anxiety of someone raising hostages in a siege. She knows that if these plants die, the argument for root crops dies with them, and the Parliament will continue to debate sheep and driftwood while stomachs distend from hunger come April. Downstairs, a quarrel escalates. Voices clatter like pots. Someone challenges another to duels that will never be fought because duels are illegal at Thingvellir. Halvai ignores the noise. She is counting leaves, 2 per seedling, now 3, marking progress in a miniature script along the chapel wall. The wall is already dense with graffiti, runic jokes, Latin prayers, crude sketches of ships. Her turnip tally looks like one more layer of human itch scratched onto stone. On the 7th day of the session, a cold rain begins. The river Uxará swells, cutting off the southern booths. Delegates crowd into drier spaces, bringing damp wool and the smell of wet dog. The loft becomes a refuge for children sent upstairs to stay out of adult trouble. They watch Halvai's mirror garden with the solemn curiosity reserved for things that might become food. One boy, whose family lost 2 cows to scours the previous winter, asks whether turnips taste better than boiled seal flipper. Halvai answers honestly, she does not know. She has never tasted one fresh. The boy considers this, then offers her a piece of dried cod in exchange for a promise that he may bite the first root. They seal the bargain with a spit handshake that leaves both palms salty. The rain continues. Tempers below fray further. Hay prices are discussed with the intensity of sagas. A skald composes a verse implying that the northern chieftains have hoarded surplus in underground caches. The verse is repeated, embroidered, finally denounced. Swords are half drawn before the law speaker intervenes, reminding everyone that the gravel plain beneath their feet is neutral ground, sanctified by centuries of lawful speech. The assembly subsides into a sullen quiet that feels more dangerous than shouting. Halvai, listening, realizes that the Parliament is starving in slow motion, not for calories, but for trust. The turnip seedlings, oblivious, unfurl their 4th leaf. On the final day of the session, the rain stops. Sunlight spears through the smoke hole, illuminating the mirror box so brightly that the seedlings appear translucent. Halvai decides that delay is more dangerous than failure. She will transplant today, publicly, turning a private gamble into communal witness. She descends the ladder carrying the box like a reliquary. Conversations gutter into silence. The godwoman, sensing theatre, clears a space before the chapel door. Halvai kneels, scoops a trowel of muddy soil, and sets the first seedling into the wound. The act is wordless yet densely symbolic. Iceland's parliament, founded on law and language, now asked to adjudicate the legitimacy of a Norwegian root. A circle forms. Someone jokes that the plant looks like a pagan offering to the Uxará spirit. Someone else counters that the Virgin Mary grew up eating turnips in Nazareth. Laughter loosens the tension. Children are invited to place the remaining seedlings. They do so gravely, pressing soil with thumbs dirtier than any bishop's ring. When the box is empty, Halvai stands, wipes her hands on her apron, and states the only fact she can guarantee. If these survive the summer, they will feed sheep in winter. If they feed sheep, fewer ewes will be slaughtered. If fewer ewes are slaughtered, there will be more milk next spring. The chain of consequences is presented like a legal judgment, each clause contingent upon the last. The assembly listens, nods, disperses. No vote is taken. None is needed. The turnips have been accepted into the Commonwealth by acclamation. That night, Halvai climbs back to the loft. The box is empty, the mirrors dull. She feels the hollow echo that follows childbirth or confession. Outside, the river chatters over lava rubble, carrying shards of ice that click like knitting needles. She realizes that the critical moment has passed unnoticed. The Parliament, famous for verbal dexterity, has legislated with shovels and thumbs. The law they have enacted is unwritten, unspoken, yet binding. The community will protect the plants until the plants protect the community. But survival is not guaranteed. The transplantation occurred late. Daylight dwindles by a finger width each evening. Frost can return without warning even in midsummer. Halvai decides to stay behind when the assembly disperses, camping beside the chapel to tend the plot. She builds a low stone wall on the northern edge, filling gaps with sheep dung that steams gently, releasing heat as it composts. Children who remain to help dismantle booths bring kelp from the lake, laying it thick as mulch. The turnips respond, leaves darkening, roots swelling like modest promises. On the summer solstice, Halvai digs one root, hesitates, then offers it to the cod-hungry boy. They wash it in the oxara, split it on a flat stone. The flesh is yellow-white, crisp, faintly sweet with the pepperiness of mustard relatives. The boy chews, eyes widening, then demands the other half. Halvai, laughing, complies. Around them, the gravel plain echoes with the sound of crunching, an auditory signature of possibility. Yet the story is not finished. Before she can harvest the rest, a late frost arrives under a moonless sky. Ice feathers the turf roofs. The river Shengyin muffles beneath a skin of glass. Halvai wakes, runs barefoot to the plot, finds every leaf collapsed, translucent, dead. The roots, insulated by soil, may still be alive, but the foliage is lost. She stands, throat raw from unspoken curses, and realizes that the Parliament is not in session to witness either triumph or disaster. The turnips have become a private grief, or so she thinks. At dawn, the god-woman appears with a shovel full of hot coals from the chapel's altar fire. Together they build a low tent of birch branches, draping it with reindeer hide. The makeshift greenhouse traps enough warmth to keep the ground from freezing. For 3 days, Halvai tends the coals, dozing fitfully, waking to add fuel, adjust vents, listen for the faint hiss of thaw. On the 4th morning, new leaves, tiny, heart-shaped, push through the dead collars. The resurrection is imperfect. Fewer plants, slower growth, yet unmistakably alive. Word reaches the dispersed chieftains via travellers. The following spring, several booths arrive carrying sacks of Norwegian turnip seed, gifts in exchange for Halvai's promise to teach planting schedules, soil preparation, storage pits. She accepts on the condition that every family receiving seed must also contribute labor to building a communal root cellar, an underground chamber lined with stone and turf, ventilated by a turf chimney designed to keep turnips unfrozen through the 7-month winter. The bargain is struck. The cellar becomes the first infrastructure project sanctioned by the Althingi that is neither church, nor bridge, nor wall. By the 3rd year, turnips have spread to every major farm in the southwest. Sheep survive winters on sliced roots mixed with hay. Milk yields rise. Fewer ewes are slaughtered, meaning more lambs in spring. The population of breeding ewes increases by 12%. A figure recorded by the same law speaker who once mocked foreign roots. Halvai, now addressed as Turnip Woman, is invited to each session not as delegate but as living witness. She attends reluctantly, sitting at the edge, knitting while debates drone. When asked for comment, she speaks only of practicalities, depth of drills, thickness of mulch, the exact shade of yellow that signals readiness for storage. Her speeches are short, devoid of rhetoric, yet they carry the weight of weathered stone. But success attracts complexity. A merchant from Bergen arrives offering to buy surplus roots for export, payment in dried cod and iron tools. The proposal divides the assembly. Some argue that trade dilutes self-sufficiency. Others claim that iron outweighs ideology. The debate lasts 3 days, growing heated enough that the law speaker threatens to suspend the session. Halvai, asked to testify, offers a single observation. Turnips rot if left in the ground past first frost. If you can eat them or swap them before they rot, do. If not, they become poison. The statement is pragmatic, unheroic, decisive. The assembly votes to accept the merchant's offer, contingent on delivery of iron ploughshares suitable for the heavy southern soils. That winter, the root cellar is fuller than ever. The iron shares arrive, and Halveg returns to her foster mother's booth. She is 45, her hair streaked silver like birch bark, her hands permanently scarred by trowel and frost. She resumes her duties, tending chapel linen, instructing catechism. Yet every spring she walks the turnip plot, now dispersed across the valley, checking leaf color, tasting random roots, nodding or frowning as if the plants were wayward kin. Children who once helped transplant now bring their own offspring to meet her. She greets them with the same quiet gravity, offering a slice of raw root crisp from the cellar. Years compress into decades. The Althingi continues to debate sheep and driftwood, but now the agenda includes seed exchange, root cellar maintenance, and the optimum ratio of turnip to hay for lactating ewes. The turnip has become a civic institution, as unremarkable yet as vital as the law speaker's staff. Halvey's name slips into the category of first two, a phrase appended to inventions no one remembers needing. She dies during a spring session, apparently in her sleep, sitting upright against the chapel door with a half-finished mitten in her lap. The session pauses. Even the law speaker removes his hat. They carry her to the churchyard at Rainier and bury her beneath a modest stone carved with a single turnip, and the words, "She gave the law a root." No dates. Icelanders reckon time by winters and thing meetings, not by numbers. Years become centuries. The Althingi survives Norwegian and Danish rule, survives Reformation and smallpox, survives volcanic winters that kill a quarter of the population. Through each crisis, the root cellar is reopened, the turnips counted, the rationing adjusted. The variety Halvey imported evolves, shorter tops, thicker skins, sweeter flesh, until it is recognizably the cultivar still sold in Reykjavik. Markets as thing turnipa. The Parliament turnip, and you, half dreaming, might wonder whether one quiet woman planting foreign seeds on neutral gravel truly changed the course of a nation. The answer is that nations change exactly this way, by microscopic accretions of care, by conversations held over sliced raw roots, by laws that forget their authors but remember the gesture that began them. The turnip field at Thingvellir is still planted every spring, still weeded by children who sing no hymns to Halvey, yet walk the rows with the same grave attention she once lavished on mirror-lit seedlings. The river Uxará continues to chatter. The Parliament continues to debate, and the roots, sweet, crisp, faintly peppery, continue to outlast every argument, feeding sheep that feed lambs that feed people who feed the future.